What is going on, you guys? It's yours truly, the real Sakurai here, and today we are continuing our Marvel Universe research, so to speak. And we're going back to Comics Explained and the requested video that was requested by one of our members of the Sakurai clan, and this one is going to be concerning Adam Warlock. So this is Infinity War Adam Warlock Explained. Now, if you guys don't know much about Adam Warlock like I do, you'll know a little bit as to who he is in like Guardians of the Galaxy 2 at the end credits, or like the end credits where he's introduced. And so far that's little of what I knew about Adam Warlock after. Not after, but before I started, watching the Infinity Gauntlet comic issue that Comics Explained posted on his channel. There was very little that I knew about Adam Warlock, and apparently he's this deity, for what I call him, a cosmic deity that's basically intertwined with the soul gem. So without further ado, let's just get on into this and learn more about said Adam Warlock.
What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so for the past couple weeks or so, we have been remastering Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. And I mean, the original content's there. I just felt like remastering it as kind of a side project because I didn't really like the way it was done initially. But because of the fact that that's really just kind of retreading water, this is more important. So it is officially the beginning of 2018, and we have about 4 months and 2 days until we see the launch of Marvel's, Infinity War movie, Avengers Infinity War. And so my job over the course of the next 4 months is to make you guys experts in everything Marvel Cosmic, covering the original Cosmic Cube story when Thanos invaded Earth for the first time, the 3 major deaths that Thanos has had, characters like Adam Warlock, who we're going to discuss here, all these things, the events leading up to Infinity Gauntlet, the aftermath of Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War, Infinity Crusade, all that stuff, all the Marvel Cosmic things. My job is to cover all that stuff, and we are starting with Adam Warlock today. So, Adam Warlock first made his appearance in Marvel Comics back in 1967 with Fantastic Four issues 66 and 67. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that in the early days of Marvel Comics, when it came to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, everything was basically a testing ground. Marvel didn't really explode onto the scene until about 1962. I mean, when you look back at the old 1940s comics, the old Name of the Submariner, Jim Hammond, The Human Torch, Captain America comics, that was Timely publications. But between the time of World War II's end and the fact that Timely stopped publishing superheroes, all the way up to the early 1960s, when Timely became Atlas, Atlas became Marvel, there was this huge lull of about 20 years when there really were no superhero comics coming out of Timely. Instead, it was science fiction, general magazines published by Magazine Management Incorporated. And so in 1962, when Marvel really launched Fantastic Four, when they launched Spider-Man, different things like that, they were basically trying to come back onto a scene of the comic book genre, which had largely been dominated by DC for, however many decades. And so as a result, the Fantastic Four were the most popular team they had. It was Marvel's answer to the Justice League. And so because of that, if Marvel was going to premiere characters, they were going to premiere teams, they threw them in the Fantastic Four. Now, for Adam Warlock himself, this 2-part story was pretty straightforward. All that really happened in this origin was that you basically had a group called the Enclave. And the Enclave were basically just a general group of scientists who wanted to conquer the world. That was really about it. But the Enclave knew that in order to pull this off with this rise of superheroes that were out there, they needed a being of virtual incalculable power who was wildly capable in terms of what he could do and could easily thwart all these different superheroes. And so what they ended up doing was basically taking all this different, cosmic energy more or less, confining it into a cocoon and then letting it form into a human being. The problem with this was that they couldn't visually look at the being inside because the amount of energy given off was too extreme. And so what the Enclave ended up doing is they kidnapped Alicia Masters, who at the time was the girlfriend of Ben Grimm, but she was blind and she was a sculptor. But she was well known for the fact that she could sculpt virtually anything just by feeling it and then making an almost perfect replica of it. And so the result is that they kidnapped her, they brought her to the Enclave, and they had her sculpt out what Adam Warlock looked like. Now, of course, this led directly into the Fantastic Four arriving to retrieve Alicia Masters, battling the Enclave, safe, Adam Warlock made his escape, and then took off for parts unknown. And the whole basis behind that was to basically say, there's this new character out there now. Whoever wants to write him, run away with it, do whatever it is that you want to do. Now, originally, because of the fact that he was just kind of a general creation that was thrown out there for virtually any writer to pick up, he wasn't actually given a name. Instead, Adam Warlock was just referred to as him, and that was really about it. Now, following this, there wasn't really anything going on when it came to Adam Warlock after his initial introduction into the Fantastic Four. Instead, it was about 2 years after his original appearance before he appeared again. And this came in a Stan Lee Jack Kirby story with Thor issues 165 and 166 between June and July of 1969. Now, the funny thing about this is that because of the fact that nobody was really picking up the slack, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby just threw Adam Warlock out there as kind of a, hey, remember, this guy still exists out there if anybody wants to write him. It was kind of interesting in terms of how it played out, because at this point in time, Adam Warlock was kind of on a grander scale in comparison to the Silver Surfer. And what I mean by that is, when the Silver Surfer appeared in the original, Galactus trilogy and was spun off into his own series, whereby he basically traveled around the world and learned about humanity, why people do the kind of things they do, and how humans perceive the universe and themselves, and so on and so forth. Adam Warlock was like that, but on a grander scale. The difference is that the Silver Surfer already had knowledge of all things in existence, so his only real curiosity was just the nature of humanity. For Adam Warlock, or him, if we want to call him that, he was really kind of infantile in the sense that he really didn't understand the nature of everything that was out there. It was really more exploration. It was effectively walking out of his house for the very first time. And a lot of those themes were played on when it came to his introduction and his involvement in Thor and different things along those lines. The problem is that once this story was done, it would be about 3 years again before Adam Warlock made his appearance. The difference is that by this point in time in 1972, Stan Lee had moved from being a writer to an editor to basically the president and publisher of Marvel. And the idea of Stan Lee was to sit down and say, by this point in time, we're 10 years out from our effective relaunch, more or less, with Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, different things along those lines. And the landscape of Marvel was rapidly growing. But for the most part, by the early 1970s, they pretty much knew what characters were solid and what characters aren't. They knew that the Fantastic Four were solid. They knew Spider-Man was solid. Thor, Iron Man, Captain America, different things like that. But the whole idea behind Stan Lee's perception of Marvel was, we don't have the money to just throw marketing out there for any character in any comic book that we want to write. Instead, we need to be selective. But we also want to make sure that we're growing our writer base, that we're growing our artist base, that we still have fans that are learning about new characters all the time. And so what Stan Lee had done is he had actually launched Marvel Premiere alongside a couple of other one-off publications called Marvel Spotlight and Marvel Feature. And what these were designed to do were basically serve as an anthology series. It was really kind of a throwback to the 1930s Marvel stories and 1930s DC stories, in the sense that Action Comics 1, for example, while that comic is most notable for the debut of Superman, it featured a handful of other stories alongside it, because the idea was to just introduce characters, introduce teams, put them in, maybe 8-page stories and see whether or not fans liked them. And what they would do is they would shuffle things up. So you would see a character appear in Marvel Premiere for like 3 or 4 issues, and Marvel would gauge the sales of it. And if the stories were consistent, Marvel would say, okay, most likely they're reading this because this one character is in this story. He's been in the last 3 stories. That's what fans are shooting for. We'll take a risk and we'll give them their own publication. And that's really what happened with the character of Adam Warlock. One thing to keep in mind here is that when it came to the character of Adam, in terms of where he would go or what he would do, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's explanation for what would happen to him was largely just kind of relegated to the idea that, well, he would fight some enemy, like he would fight Thor, he would try to procreate with Sif, Thor would beat the crap out of him, and then he would just go heal in a cocoon somewhere. And in truth, it was really just kind of a throwaway idea. It was just a way for Stan Lee and Jack Kirby to explain where he went to, just like, the Avengers would go back to Avengers Tower, or Captain America would go to his apartment, or something along those lines. It was a throwaway concept. But the irony is that with Marvel Premiere #1 and Roy Thomas really kind of being brought on board by Stan Lee as a fledgling writer, because of the fact that he fit nicely into this whole idea of using Marvel Premiere and Spotlight and Feature and so on as a proving ground for whether or not a person could actually write stories, what Roy Thomas did is he took the whole idea of the cocoon, he rolled it over into the actual Adam Warlock mythos, and then in turn expanded the nature of Warlock. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when it came to Adam Warlock's character, the reason why people say he's so important is because he helped to kind of usher in and build on this idea of Marvel Comics becoming more grounded and more real world in terms of how they were depicted. I mean, back in 1971, really the year before Marvel Premiere debuted, Jerry Conway had already killed off Gwen Stacy. So it had already been established that like a superhero like Spider-Man could fail disastrously and basically lose his love interest because of his own actions. And so the idea was to take some real world themes and throw them into Marvel comic characters. The issue with this was that it was very, very risky. It was not something Marvel could just do and expect the fan base to be perfectly on board. And so what ended up happening here is Roy Thomas created something called the Counter-Earth Saga. And what this did is it introduced the concept of a place called Counter-Earth. Now, a little bit of history here. Back in Thor issue number 134 in 1966, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby introduced a character by the name of Herbert Wyndham. High Evolutionary was introduced and has been expanded on over the years as a guy who's basically obsessed with evolution. Of course, he's evolved himself, but he creates new forms of life and different things like that. But there's always been this ongoing theme of dissatisfaction with the existing world on behalf of the High Evolutionary. And so what Roy Thomas did is he grabbed his character, he grabbed the themes of his character, he grabbed the character of Adam Warlock and rolled them all together. And so Counter-Earth was basically this alternate version of Earth that existed on the other side of the sun, but was about a second or two outside of the dimensional barrier of Earth, meaning no more Earthlings wouldn't see it. And essentially Counter-Earth was kind of like this utopian place. The problem with this was that Counter-Earth didn't really have any superheroes to speak of. However, the actions of the High Evolutionary in terms of some of his creations being sent to Counter-Earth resulted in the emergence of a character known as Man-Beast. Now, this is very important. And the reason why was because in order for Roy Thomas to create the kind of religious themes that he wanted to do, again, he had to focus on an alternate version of the Earth as it existed in Marvel Comics. And so with Counter-Earth and with Adam Warlock, what he created were these very Christ-like themes in the sense that Adam Warlock himself was very much like Jesus Christ. And along the way, on his mission to basically defeat Man-Beast, he met like 4 people. It was like David Carter, Jason Gray, I think it was, and then like Eddie Roberts and a girl named Ellie. I can't remember her last name. I want to say it's Ellie Roberts, but I'm not going to swear to that. I mean, we're talking about comics from the 1970s, so
right.
I'd like to think I know a lot, but I don't know that much. But the fact remains here that with regards to these characters, these 4 folks, they were basically designed to be like his own, not really prophets, but I guess his followers. They would basically chronicle the actions of Adam. Now, of course, with regards to Warlock getting its first name Adam, that was given to him, I believe, by Ellie. And again, that's designed to be a homage to very Judeo-Christian themes in the sense that, according to biblical scripture, Adam was the name of the first being created by God. And so again, it was designed to very much be in that vein. Now, of course, Man-Beast and the Counter-Earth saga was really kind of this allegory for Satan in the sense that Man-Beast was the Satan-like figure. He was the ultimate evil on Counter-Earth, and Adam Warlock was the ultimate good. Now, in order to arm Adam Warlock for his battle against Man-Beast, what High Evolutionary had done is, of course, woken him up, brought him out of his cocoon, and then gave him the Soul Gem. And the Soul Gem was one of the very first indications of these insane levels of power that existed out there. But the Soul Gem, as it was created by Roy Thomas in Marvel Premiere #1, was never really intended to go on to be what it is, which is to say part of the Infinity Stones and different things like that. A lot of that was, Jim Starlin grabbing all these themes and just kind of rolling them together in the Thanos stories. But the fact remains here that the Soul Gem was basically used by Adam Warlock to kind of enhance his abilities, but it was also toying on this idea that the Soul Gem housed Soul World, it was actually able to trap souls, different things along those lines. But with Adam Warlock, the battle between himself and Man-Beast really stretched for the first 2 parts of Marvel Premieres 1 and 2, and then really he was just kind of defeated and then forced back into his original form. But following this, again, this sort of return of evil, so to speak, began to take its form in the Power of Warlock solo series. And this really ran for about 8 issues up until about October of 1973, and it was designed to just kind of continue the themes that were found in Marvel Premiere. But because of the fact that Warlock was so popular among readers at the time, what Roy Thomas did is he basically spun out the remainder of the fight between Man-Beast and Adam Warlock in Power of Warlock issues 1 and 2. Now, following the defeat of Man-Beast going into issues 3 through 8, it was really kind of like this exploration of what Counter-Earth was like, and it was really designed to be the original home of Adam Warlock. It was basically going to be where his stories took place, where he would travel to the main Marvel Earth from time to time, but for the most part, he would stay confined on Counter-Earth as its only real superhero, very much maintaining these Christ-like themes and these concepts with regards to how his character functioned. But the issue with this, when it came to the character of Adam, was that by this point in time, 1971, 1972, Roy Thomas was making massive contributions to Marvel Comics. I mean, writing things like the Kree Skrull War, characters like Ultron, different things like that. And because of the work that he'd put in, when Stan Lee was promoted to the position of president, Roy Thomas was moved to editor-in-chief. And what this meant was that it only really allowed Roy Thomas to focus on the most popular titles that he was writing at the time. And while Adam Warlock did have a following among fans, it was very similar to the original following of Doctor Strange in the sense that it was only a small niche group of people. And so the result was that following the writing of Roy Thomas, what he really did here is he just kind of wrapped up the plot threads from the original Power of Warlock story in some Strange Tale comics, different things like that. This ultimately ran up until Jim Starlin took over the title. And the reason why this is so important is because where Roy Thomas had made Adam Warlock a kind of Christ-like figure, Jim Starlin expanded the cosmic scope. He basically brought Adam Warlock into this role of being more of a universal Christ-like figure as opposed to just one on Counter-Earth. And so running between 1975 all the way up to December of 1977, the Power of Warlock series was continued on numerically, running between issues 9 to 15. And then, of course, the last little tidbits were finished up in like Marvel Team Up and Avengers Annual and Marvel 2-in-1, different things like that. But the whole idea was to basically introduce a character called the Magus. And one of the things this did was focus on the possibility of Adam Warlock becoming a villain. And if Adam Warlock became a bad guy, if he basically became everything he stood against, what would that villain look like? And so what Jim Starlin did is he crafted this story, and he basically said, at some point in the future, Adam Warlock will become corrupted by the soul gem he possesses. And when he does, he'll form a religious sect called the Universal Church of Truth, which will be his mindless followers, more or less. And the result is they will do whatever it is that he wants them to do. This will cause him to grow in madness and so on and so forth. And so in an effort to keep this from happening, what we ended up having were all these different themes that came together. The introduction of characters like Gamora, creation of Pip the Troll, Thanos being brought in. And so Thanos' desire to continue gaining power fit in very, very nicely with the role that Adam Warlock played. Because where it saw the two of them team up for the most part, at the end of the day, where Magus was basically defeated, it was always this lingering possibility that Adam Warlock could become the Magus. And so again, it was really Thanos being brought in kind of an underhanded way, in the sense that he was, well, I'll help you keep from becoming the Magus, all the while plotting and scheming and trying to find ways to steal the soul gem from Adam Warlock himself. Now, again, following this, because of the fact that the writing of Jim Starlin with regards to the handling of Adam Warlock and even the writing of Roy Thomas wasn't the most well received among the larger fan base of Marvel, and because of the fact that the mid-1970s were starting to see this expansive scope of the Marvel cosmology with the introduction of characters like Quasar, Silver Surfer, Galactus, different things like that, there wasn't really a whole lot of room for a character like Adam Warlock, who didn't really have stories that were grand in terms of the cosmic scope. And
I
so
would
what
have
Jim
loved
Starlin
these
did
stories.
is he set the seeds for future use of Adam
I
when
would
it
have
came
loved
to
these
the
stories.
last little tidbits of his own story. And what had effectively happened here is that Gamora had been assigned to the role of a bodyguard for Adam Warlock, and then Adam Warlock learned the true nature of the Soul Gem, in the sense that the Soul Gem was one of 6 Infinity Stones. Now, of course, this also allowed Adam Warlock to kind of enter the Soul Stone and then just stay there. And so what ended up happening is about 11 years after the last, tidbits of this story, Adam Warlock effectively vanished off the face of the earth out of Marvel's publication history, and he didn't come back until we basically got the aftermath of Thanos in Silver Surfer Volume 3, issue number 34. And what Jim Starlin did is he basically laid the groundwork for the return of Adam Warlock by virtue of a story called the Infinity Gauntlet. And what this did is it introduced the idea that Thanos had been traveling around and gaining all these different Infinity Stones for the most part. And the return of Adam Warlock, of course, leaving the Soul Stone, so on and so forth, coincided with this sort of grander scope in terms of what Jim Starlin perceived him to be. And so over the course of the Infinity Gauntlet story, which you'll find down in the description, Adam Warlock wasn't really a guy who engaged in the fight per se. Instead, he played very much this leadership role. He didn't really act overtly. He directed other people in terms of the roles that they should play. But this expansion of Adam Warlock came with the idea that there's this kind of nature about the universe and the forces that encompass it that nobody else really seems to have. And so because of this, Adam Warlock basically organized the united front of the Earth superheroes against Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet. He organized this front from the cosmic entities. It was one of these things where Starlin effectively established that on a cosmic scale, Adam Warlock is well known and well respected by a lot of the entities. The other half of this was that the possibility of Adam Warlock becoming a villain was still very real in terms of the role that Magus played. And so following the events of Infinity Gauntlet, whereby Adam Warlock was able to secure the gauntlet for himself, bring the conflict to an end, this led directly into the story's aftermath and then led directly into Infinity War. So again, it was kind of like this massive Infinity story that was done by Jim Starlin himself with regards to the character of Adam. Now, one of the things that Starlin played on here when it came to Infinity War was that he formed something called Warlock and the Infinity Watch. And it was basically this idea that in the aftermath of the Infinity Gauntlet, because of the fact that all Thanos sought was absolute power, that it was like, okay, fine, he can take the place of eternity and he can have the Infinity Gauntlet according to the Living Tribunal. But for Adam Warlock himself, he would look to rule over the universe not as an entity, but as a supreme judge of what's right and wrong. The problem here is that Adam Warlock didn't understand the nature of people on a true scale. And so this argument basically meant that Adam Warlock was neither equipped mentally or emotionally to wield the Infinity Gauntlet and the power it possessed. The Living Tribunal agreed and ordered Adam Warlock to disperse the gems. And so forcing the disbanding of the Infinity Gauntlet and then going the next step and saying, if all the gems are brought together, they will never work, allowed for, the formation of the Infinity Watch, whereby Adam Warlock grabbed Pip the Troll, he grabbed Moondragon, the daughter of Drax the Destroyer, and gave each of them an Infinity Stone. He even gave one to Thanos and simply said, your job will be to safeguard these things. These led directly into the events of Infinity War, whereby we ended up learning that Adam had subconsciously purged himself of good and evil, which is the whole reason for why he was deemed unworthy, that the evil version of himself, the Magus, had basically made a return, and Infinity War picked up from there with Adam Warlock basically having to fight an evil version of himself. That led an Infinity Crusade, whereby Adam Warlock had to fight the purely good version of himself, known as Goddess. But over the course of it all, Jim Starlin constantly began to expand and really emphasize this relationship that existed between Adam Warlock and Thanos, that where the two of them were were enemies in a lot of ways, they were also extremely close in terms of their greater understanding of the cosmology. And so what this ended up doing is it actually allowed Jim Starlin to spin out a litany of Infinity books that were isolated from the main Marvel Universe line of stories that focused almost explicitly on Adam Warlock and Thanos. Now again, because of the fact that these stories of Infinity Gauntlet and Infinity War, even Infinity Crusade, were so incredibly popular among Marvel readers at the time, the stories of Adam Warlock were actually bolstered by virtue of the writing of Jim Starlin. So what this meant was that instead of Warlock and the Infinity Watch being what amounted to a maxi series, which is about 12 issues long, instead it was spun out into a series that ran for 42 issues. It ran all the way up until 1995. The problem with this was that the success of Adam Warlock really began to give way to a lot of different things. The notorious comic busts of the 1990s, the fact that stories were designed to be more high octane, more fast paced, but the stories of Adam Warlock didn't really keep up with that style of storytelling, and even the fact that a lot of readers were getting burned out. And so because of that, Adam Warlock effectively fell back into the middle of no man's land. Now, Marvel tried a couple times to kind of revive interest in his character, throwing him off into like Ultraverse, different things like that, but at the end of the day, it never really seemed to gain the same kind of popularity he did before. And all this really ran up until about 2006, when the Marvel cosmology was effectively consolidated and revamped in its entirety by a guy named Dan Abnett. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the Marvel cosmology as it existed before Dan Abnett had taken up the pen and basically helped to form a lot of it all, it was really just sort of disheveled. Marvel largely focused on Earth-based stories, Earth-based events, because that's where most of the superheroes dwelled. Now, with Dan Abnett, what he'd done is he had grabbed things like Peter Quill, who'd previously been created, revamped his character in his entirety, made him the new version of Star-Lord, and just kind of threw him out there. Grabbing all these different themes really went into stories like Annihilation, where a nihilist from the Negative Zone invaded the main Marvel universe, captured Galactus, different things like that, conquering one planet after another. And it worked exceedingly well, because while the event of Annihilation was going on, for example, you had civil war that was taking place. And so on Earth, you had superheroes fighting over superhuman registration. And while that was happening, the universe was being conquered. And so you had tie-ins like Nova, Richard Rider would show up on Earth and say, why are you guys fighting over something so stupid like superhuman registration when worlds are falling left and right in front of a nihilist by the forces he possesses? Why does this matter? It was a great contrast to basically highlight this idea that what goes on Earth is really irrelevant in relation to everything that goes on in the universe. And so what this did is it basically dead-ended into a story called Annihilation Conquest. And Annihilation Conquest effectively saw this kind of return of Adam Warlock. Now, Annihilation Conquest itself largely focused on the idea that Ultron had previously been defeated and his essence had kind of been, escaped out into space or been shot out into space. It ultimately came across this, cybernetic machine-based race called the Phalanx. Ultron effectively co-opted the race, made it his own, crowned himself king, and began the process of trying to conquer the universe. This led into Moondragon, and it led into Phyla Vel, I think it was, basically forming an alliance, waking up Adam Warlock, and then bringing him into the conflict. And so it was effectively a revival of his character. Now, this was part of a much larger stage for Adam Warlock when it came to Dan Abnett, and a lot of it really came to a head in the events of Thanos Imperative. But the idea behind this was to basically restore Adam Warlock back to being this role of kind of a cosmic Christ-like figure, but to also highlight the idea that he's one of many characters that exist out there in relation to the cosmic landscape. So it really wasn't designed to say he was a step above everybody else, so much as he fought alongside everybody else. But what had happened was that with regards to defeating Ultron in like Annihilation Conquest and several other stories that took place after that, this ultimately resulted in something called the Thanos Imperative. Now, the Thanos Imperative was actually the aftermath to an event called the War of Kings. And the War of Kings was basically Vulcan, who had taken over the Shi'ar Empire, as well as Black Bolt, who had taken over the Kree Empire, going to war with one another. And the idea was that because of the events of Annihilation and Annihilation Conquest, like a piece of glass, the universe was in a very fragile state. And if someone tapped it the right way, it would basically create this rift and eventually destroy the universe. And so because of the entire conflict of the War of Kings, this led to the detonation of a massive bomb by Black Bolt and the Inhumans leading the Kree Empire that created a fissure in the universe. And when it did, on the other side of that fissure was a universe where Mistress Death had been killed and nobody else had been able to die. It was basically called the Cancerverse. And so in order to basically keep all these things from happening, Adam Warlock had merged timelines, and the timeline he used was an alternate future where he became the Magus. And what it did is it allowed Dan Abnett, Marvel, and all these guys, all these writers, to basically grab the character of the Magus, bring that character back, and then launch the Thanos Imperative, which again really kind of saw the return of Thanos, different things like that. But this story culminated in the idea that the Magus was working for this version of Captain Marvel in the Cancerverse who was exceedingly evil and wanted to conquer the main Marvel universe. And so what we got in the Cancerverse were all these evil versions of superheroes. It was all these evil versions of characters who'd become corrupted. And so the result was that, of course, they were basically defeated. Thanos Imperative came to an end. It led to the sacrifice of Peter Quill and of Nova. Thanos eventually ended up escaping. It was all these different things that went on with regards to this massive climax to a story that had been building for somewhere around 3 or 4 years. But because of the fact that the return of the Magus was always this concept that was haunting Adam Warlock, and the idea that the Magus would always make his return so long as Adam Warlock lived, in the Thanos Imperative Ignition one-shot by Dan Abnett, he effectively wrapped up the character of Adam Warlock in the main Marvel Universe by effectively having him killed off, by having Star-Lord kill Adam Warlock to ensure that Magus would never be able to return. Now, of course, this also coincided with Captain Marvel from the Cancerverse killing Magus as well, but the fact remains here that it was an interesting concept because following this, it kind of gets a little bit hairy with regards to Adam Warlock. For example, stories like Infinity Revelation that have this depiction of Adam Warlock and Thanos basically meeting alternate reality counterparts. So it kind of begs the question, does Infinity Revelation take place in the main Marvel Universe? And the answer is not necessarily definitive because almost all the other Infinity stories, Infinity Abyss, different things like that, those take place outside of the main Marvel Universe. Infinity Revelation, Marvel The End, all those things seem to be outside the main Marvel Universe. And in a lot of ways, Jim Starlin kind of toyed on that. Again, it's really kind of weird in terms of how those stories play out, but by and large, I would argue that Thanos Imperative was really the last appearance of Adam Warlock in the main Marvel Universe in terms of how I would define his appearances in the main Marvel Universe. From there, it really kind of breaks down to Jim Starlin fans who were just like, no, it's all in the main Marvel Universe and so on and so forth, and it is kind of interesting. But the fact remains here, again, hopefully this helps you guys understand the nature of Adam, what it is that he's capable of, how he's evolved over the years. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.
Jesus Christ. Oh my God. So, all in all, Adam Warlock is basically Jesus. He's basically Christ himself when he originated out, and the whole cocoon thing probably explains it, because at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy 2, I'm gonna put this up again, we see the introduction of Adam being presented while he was in this little sphere-like cocoon. And she said, I will call him Adam. I was like, oh, this guy is important, but I don't know who he is. And this explains it. Because, Adam Warlock, back in those days, he was presented well, but now no one really knows about him unless, you do research about him. And it sucks that, he got shafted like that. I would have loved to read comics about him, because that's something that deals with stuff going outside Earth. We've now gotten to the point where we fans as comic book like hero fans, when we look at stuff that is concerning gods and stuff outside of Earth, we want to see more of that rather than it being focused on Earth. We've gotten to that point where we're so used to just dealing with people like Captain America, Spider-Man, and all that, where we kind of want to have them deal with stuff that is from outside of Earth, and we want to see what is on the other side of the spectrum, what is going on in other galaxies and all that. And I think that it would be dope to have an Adam Warlock movie, something that concerns Adam Warlock and Thanos, or however they choose to do it, because it really is an interesting story as to how Adam Warlock came to be. It's really interesting to me, and I honestly think that it is, even though that it was in that one of those comic book issues where Adam Warlock came to Earth and he was given the soul gem to gain even more power. I still feel like it would be dope to have an Adam Warlock movie, because it'll be something that a lot of people would take light to, and hopefully it wouldn't be like Thor, how the first Thor movie started. I hope it wouldn't be like that, because from the way Comics Explained explained it, the humans who followed him were his followers from other Earth, from the other Earth, from Counter Earth. I didn't even know they made a Counter Earth. What? I just would have loved that. No, if they would introduce Counter Earth and have Adam Warlock and his followers be on there and just try to uh stop everything, and him fighting the man beast, oh my god. That would be that would be awesome. Like, I know it's an old comic, but that would be so dope if that was a movie. That would be so dope if that was a movie. I'm just saying, that would be cool. Anyway, you guys, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about Adam Warlock. Would you like to see a movie about him? Would you like to see more things about him, or are you just okay with him being a shot in the dark? Let me know in the comment section down below. Follow this. Follow my links if you would choose to do so, and share this video on other media sites if you would like to, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, however you may choose to do it. I'm very grateful to have you guys part of the Sakurai clan. Until then, this has been The Real Sakurai, and I hope you guys have a fantastic day. Peace.